I'm here with wonderful Gareth Pugh, and it's actually really apt that we're here, isn't it, Gareth? Because literally a matter of days ago, you showed your collection here. You did your Runway London Fashion Week show here.
Yeah.
And I want to start by asking you about that before we talk about sort of your life as a designer. Because you've shown in Paris for 7 years, and then this season it was the 10-year anniversary of the Gareth Pugh brand, and you returned to London Fashion Week. So it was really, really special. Tell me a bit about what inspired that decision to come back and where you're at now, 10 years in.
Well, we showed here last week. It kind of feels like a lifetime ago.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And yeah, the decision was kind of basically informed by a few different factors in that, we'd shown in Paris since September 2008. And the season before last, we showed in New York Fashion Week. Yeah. It just so happened that the next season, February 2015, marked 10 years of me showing. My first show being back in 2005, February, with Fashion East and London Bridge, and it's kind of a milestone for me to be kind of, I guess, proud of and celebrate. And I've always lived and worked in London, even though Wikipedia sometimes begs to differ. So it was really nice to be able to kind of, and all the people I work with on all aspects of the show predominantly live in London, and London's a big part of me and who I am and what the work's all about anyway. So it just felt really apt to kind of come back to London. I called the V&A was one of the first people who I called to sort of just, because I did a fashion and motion show here more or less when I first started, and that was an incredible honour and very surreal. It was actually, I think, they were part of a surrealist exhibition program that they were doing at the time, and it was funny that they kind of had a slot on the Saturday night of Fashion Week free, so they penciled me in. And yeah, we didn't have to rub it out. It was fun.
And tell me, it's interesting because you said, London is a part of you, and I think that was one of the things that was most striking about the show, and also about Ruth Ogden's beautiful fashion film that kind of opened the show, was the collection really seemed to explore Britishness and kind of national identity and the whimsical and beautiful romantic parts of that, and then perhaps the slightly more aggressive sides. I thought Matthew Stone's soundtrack with the Sunderland football chants was amazing. Tell me, do you think that your work is about Englishness or Britishness or London?
I feel that there's a certain sensibility that is inherently English about this kind of whole make, do and mend with creating things. I started working and met Judy Blame at a very kind of early age, and he was a very big supporter of what I was doing. And if I could think of anybody who's sort of like made that into a career, it would be him. It's sort of like this whole like making the kind of crap or the rubbish of like the things you would just find on a street sort of into something beautiful is something that it has its merits, and it has its it has a certain sort of English beauty. And it's like last season we were doing a lot of the collection we were doing was about English folklore, and you see that a lot, and that idea of make, do and mend permeates that whole kind of aesthetic, sort of making something totemic out of something that is quite everyday. And it's always been something that I've done, whether it's making stuff out of bin bags or, just like crap you found around the studio. It's like, it's sort of a fun way of it's like a little kind of challenge every season to sort of see what you can do with what's around you. Because I think, if you have all of the money in the world and all the options available to you, you sometimes can get a little, sort of like blindsided with actually what you want to do. Whereas if you have limitations and you have boundaries, then you have to work within those things and make do with what you've got. And I think that's kind of what it's about. But the whole show that we had last week here was, you know, just going back to your thing about Britishness, it was more about the idea of sort of sacrificing it to yourself to something bigger than who you are. It's quite like a, I don't know, like quite a monastic thing or quite a religious kind of thing in a sense, historically speaking. But I guess for me, it's more about just being happy and being quite pragmatic about what I have and what I can do, and trying to do the best that I can within the means that I have. You know, I'm not kind of pretending that those means are sort of better than anybody else's, because they're not by any stretch of the imagination. But, you know, we do what we can with what we've been given, and that's the best I can do, you know.
It's interesting to think about that notion, I think, though, particularly 10 years in, because I think, you know, you say we do what we can with what we have, but I think there's always been an element of choice in that with you. You know, you have never, for want of a better phrase, sort of sold out, and you've always kind of, you never bent your aesthetic to fit with commercial demands. You know, we're not seeing you doing a lot of the things that designers start to do as they build their brands and become more commercial. Do you find operating within fashion as a commercial entity quite tricky?
It's a very fine line, and it basically just comes down to the joy and ability of saying no. You know, it's like we get asked to do a lot of different things, and we say no a lot of times, just simply because it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't do us any favours to do those things. So it's just about making choices and about sticking to your guns and believing in what, you know, because what kind of gets me is that all these people who kind of come to ask you to do things, they're not just asking you to do something for them, they're actually asking you to attribute everything that you've ever worked towards to their brand. And if that doesn't make sense, then why should I give everything I have to, I don't know, like some thing? It's like there's a lot of different examples of a lot of things that I could have done that I haven't, but you know, if it doesn't make sense to me and it doesn't kind of ring true with what we kind of want to achieve, then why do it? Because you have the ability to decide, so it's up to the individual, I guess.
It's interesting because I interviewed you recently for another magazine, and one of the things that you said in that, which I'm paraphrasing a bit, but you kind of said, you know, obviously fashion, in a way it is about selling something, but you said, you know, the end game for me is never kind of selling a garment. And what is the end game to you as a designer? Because I think it is quite different, perhaps, to your peers in some ways.
I don't know, it's a difficult one. I mean, I first started showing kind of, I was asked very late in the game, 4 weeks before the show, and there was no idea, or there was nothing behind me in terms of what we do after the show, like in terms of selling clothes or any sort of commercial presence. It was just, let's do it and let's make it exciting, and that's always been my sort of goal, I guess, is to make it exciting, not only for me, but for the people who are involved in it, the people who are watching it. And that's kind of important for me to sort of maintain, because if I don't find it exciting, then I know other people aren't going to find it exciting, so why bother?
When you say it, what do you mean the show? Do you mean what you're producing? Do you just mean...
Just doing work. I mean, you know, it's like, you know, what we were just talking about deciding or choosing to do things or not do things. It's like, if those things don't resonate, then why do them? Because, you know, obviously for money, but you know, I don't know, it's like, I feel like what I have, the value of what I have is what I do, rather than, you know, how much we sell a dress for. And you know, it's like the way that we sort of have been set up is that we don't necessarily profit from the amount of clothes that we sell, because it's sort of like this, you know, old school Italian way of doing business, but that's fine. And it's afforded me actually a lot of freedom to be able to not necessarily be focused so much on on the numbers. You know, it's like I don't have time for pie charts and, you know, like graphs of sort of like this is really well sold. It's like, you know, it's like if it doesn't excite me, I'm not going to do it. And I'm kind of in a fortunate situation that there's nobody telling me that I have to do things. So, you know, I'm my own worst enemy, I guess.
It's interesting, you kind of talked a little bit then, you kind of talked about your first show, that Fashionista show, and I do kind of want to go back and talk about your trajectory. And tell me, when you were small, did you always want to be a fashion designer?
No.
What did you want to do?
I wanted to be a chef, and then I wanted to be, which obviously was never going to happen. I wanted to be a dancer, not really. You know, I was on Biker Grove, but I can't act. You know what I mean? So I wanted to be a dancer, and that was something that I kind of wanted to be for quite a long time. But it was when I was about 16, 17, I had to make a decision between if I did that or if I kind of like stuck in a school. So, you know, life's full of decisions. Hopefully I took the right path, who knows?
And were you quite a creative kid? Were you drawing a lot? Do you remember like the first thing you ever made, whether it was a piece of fashion or?
Well, yeah, my brother used to call me the paper and sellotape creator. That was my title, and I guess the first thing, well, I tried to make a pair of trousers, which is very unfortunate. I still haven't really quite, you know, mastered the art of a pair of trousers, but you know, my trousers right now are a little better than my first attempt, which was 2 tubes with a crotch sewn in, and realised that actually you can't get them past your knees. I think I was about 10. But when I used to do because obviously I was a dancer, and I was one of 2 male dancers in the whole of the Northeast, so I always used to get cast for the pantomime. So I tried to recreate a kind of pantomime hat that we wore at the pantomime.
Has that
It's kind of
influenced
quite
you?
a
Though? You still
medieval-
make quite a lot of quite extravagant headwear. That's quite a big part of your collections.
Yeah, I kind of didn't realise that we did that until quite recently. Anna Della Russo came to the studio last season and commented on how much we do hats, and I just feel it's, you know, we've worked with Stephen Jones in the past, and we worked with Philip Treacy, and we've worked with this guy Noel Stewart, and we do a lot of stuff on our own as well. It's just an integral part of it, you know, of the outfit or the look, or sometimes it is the whole kind of part of it. So it's important to get right. So I don't see above the neck as being different to below the neck. So if we need something up there, we'll either get someone to do it for us, or, you know, if we're being pragmatic about money, we'll do it ourselves.
And tell me a bit more about the dancing, because that's one thing I find really interesting about your work, because you are kind of, you don't limit your creativity to the runway. You know, you've done a lot of work in dance, and particularly collaborating with Wayne McGregor. And tell me about some of the other avenues that you pursue. Well,
you know, it's nice to work with nice people, and Wayne asked me quite a while ago, I don't know how he got my number. He just kind of called me up out of the blue and was like, he kind of just asked me to sort of do my dream thing. He was kind of like, do you want to do costumes and set for this new ballet I have at the Royal Opera House? And I was like, what? You know, it's like, I'd never done set before. I'd barely done any kind of costume design with regard to dance before. Yeah, he gave me this kind of whole platform to sort of just play with. You know, like the main stage at the Royal Opera House is kind of quite being thrown at the deep end. But it was something that really kind of resonated with me. It certainly wasn't a money job, and it was something that we kind of threw ourselves into. You know, there was a lot of trial and error at the studio, and there was a lot of negotiating with the Opera House, because, you know, their dancers and what we wanted to put them in was quite challenging, and they'd never quite seen this sort of restriction or what we wanted to do, and it was a whole sort of task to get it through, but it was an amazing experience, and yeah, I mean, it was one of those things that I got incredibly excited about, and to see what you do in a totally other context with a totally different audience, and to see it sort of resonate with people on a different level was really kind of quite, it just was quite satisfying.
And seeing your clothes in movement is something that is very dear to you, and I think, you know, one of the things that I've always found so interesting about your work is how you have really sort of pushed the boundaries of how fashion can be presented, particularly through working with things like installation and fashion film, which obviously, you know, is all about seeing fashion in movement. This is it's an awkward question in some ways, because obviously I think it's hard to be aware of your own influence, but did you consciously try and kind of disrupt the way that fashion was being presented, or was it more that you just wanted to make fashion films?
No, I mean, the first film, I mean, you know, I actually have never really been asked this question, which is quite interesting.
Oh, really?
But the first fashion film me and Ruth made together, which is when the first time we ever really sort of, the first time we ever had to tell big lies to the Chambre syndicale in Paris. Because, you know, if in Paris, if you have a video or a presentation, it has to be listed differently as a fashion show. You know, it gets put in a sidebar of
Different
the day.
schedule, yeah.
So the first time we did it, me and Ruth, it was very last minute. It was basically my factory in Italy had just done a menswear show for me, and they were unable to sort of do all of the samples and all of the work that they needed to do on a women's wear show, and it was very, very close proximity to one another. It was the men's wear show was January, the women's wear show was end of February. So it was like, okay, so we can't drop a season. We need to do something that still gives us a presence there. So we kind of felt a little bit like Del Boy and Rodney, sort of like wheeling and dealing, doing this film and not really telling anybody about it until it was presented. But that whole video that we did with Ruth and Natasha Vojnovic was out of necessity. We couldn't do a whole show based on the amount of samples that we had, so how else do you do a show? And that was the most obvious solution. And it just turned out to be quite impactful, quite sort of right place, right time, but it was a very happy accident. It wasn't, you know, we just had to do a show, so that was the way that it made sense to do a show. It wasn't, let's sort of like try and fuck up the system by, you know, doing a video, but there was a lot of lies told.
But they were fine with it in the end, weren't they?
Yeah, they loved it. Didier Grombacher used to be, you know, he's still involved in the Chambre syndicale, but he, you know, the guy who sort of oversees everything was very, you know, he loves anything that sort of like pushes people's buttons or sort of like kind of pushes things forwards a little bit. So he was very sort of happy that we'd told those little white lies.
My favourite story is how you told me that at that show, people didn't realise it was going to be a film, so there were photographers kind of running, trying to find a backstage area.
Yeah,
and then
it's
there wasn't
crazy.
one.
It's like people are so sort of like caught in this idea that that's what a show is, and it would kind of caught a lot of people off guard. But you know, it's like that's just sort of how it was that season, and it worked so well for us that you know, we revisited that a few times. But yeah, I mean, it's like you can do a lot of things with a film that you can't do with you know, all these little like things that come from having to do that. Actually, like the amount of control that you are able to exert over what images are seen from your work, from being able to do a film as opposed to a live show, and you know, people see what you want them to see rather than, you know, if there's an accident or if there's some sort of accident, I mean like a model tripping or you know, a live shows, it's like film and theatre, I guess. You know, there's like a big element of risk with doing something live. As soon as that model goes out, it's up to her to kind of...
You're handing control over it in some way.
Yeah, which as a Virgo is kind of a difficult thing to do. So the film aspect of it really sort of appealed, because not only were we able to present a whole show via a film, we were also able to take all of the stills that come from a live show and kind of produce them ourselves as well. So it was a whole different way of looking at things. And
Are you a bit of a control freak?
A little bit. You know, I know what I want, and I work with great people in order to sort of facilitate that idea, but there's a lot of wrangling in order to get to where we should all be. And
let's talk more about the way that clothes are presented, because I think it's interesting. I think particularly because of sort of the internet and digital spaces, people talk as if, you know, it's never been more open how you can present. You can do a film, you can do a presentation, you can do this and you can do that. But personally, sometimes, you know, it's just my opinion, you might disagree, I feel like there's even more pressure on doing a show. You know, the fashion show, it's almost kind of become so fetishized. It's what you do if you're a serious designer. Do you feel that sometimes, that actually people are even perhaps slightly more conservative than they once were, that if it's not a show, then it's not as kind of, I guess it goes back to what we were saying about the scheduling, it's not as serious or significant?
Yeah, I mean, it was, you know, it's something that you fight against all the time, because you want to, you know, fashion is such an industry based on change, and it's the sort of the least changeable in a sense of this kind of system that's set up in order to kind of show the work. But I understand that it's not just about, you know, when you show and when you show in different cities and you understand the kind of audience you have, sometimes I get it really kind of annoys me to think that there's a large majority of people who go to your show not to see the work but to be seen at your show. And there's a lot of that involved in it, and there's a lot of that kind of like fashion mafia, I guess, sort of in place to sort of maintain this stronghold that they have on how work's presented, because it's a whole thing of if you don't do a show and a live show with models walking, you are seen as having a lesser, you know, basically it's about a cultural dialogue, and it's as if your conversation within that dialogue is somehow weakened because of the lack of live models. It's like, you know, sometimes a catwalk show can be like a tennis match. It's like up and down and up and down, and it's like, what are you trying to say? It's like, I don't get it, it's bullshit. And it's like, unless you actually have something to say, it's like, why do it? But it's all of these factors that are set up for people to be able to have this platform. You know, I always think myself, it's like there's people who are much better at what I do than what I do, but I'm being very lucky and being very privileged to have this sort of platform.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, it's like I went to St Martin's and I wasn't the best in my year, and there's all these people who are much better at, you know, like kind of like conceptualize an idea and make it into a final product. But, you know, you're lucky and you meet the right people, or you do things at the right time, and you know, it's like, I wouldn't do myself a disservice. It's a hell of a lot of work, but, you know, it's like, the people who were chosen in order to give that level of visibility or that platform to show their work are very lucky, and I always think of myself as being very lucky. Although, you know, it's like I maybe look a little bit older than my 33 years now. You know, a lot of dark shadows and stuff, but you know, it's important to understand that sort of competitive edge, because if you don't try and push yourself, there's other people who are going to be pushing themselves harder and doing more interesting things, and it's like that's how it should be. It shouldn't be you have this seat of power that you kind of can kind of languish in and sort of enjoy. It's like you have to fight for it every season, and you know, you're defined by your work. So why not try and do the most kind of visceral, sort of emotive, interesting, exciting thing that you could possibly do. You know, it's like I don't like fashion shows as tennis matches.
But it's interesting to me that you kind of talk about that sort of competitive element to fashion, because I do feel, and I mean this as a compliment, like your work has always kind of sat out away from your peers. I'm not saying that you're not on the same level as them, but I would never equate you to what's happening, say, with, you know, your Christopher Kanes or your Mary Katranzis or your Jonathan Saunders. It feels like the way you've chosen to operate as a designer is very different, and perhaps you judge your success as a designer on different rewards to what they do.
Yeah.
Is that a conscious thing? Do you feel like you have peers, or do you feel like you're always kind of doing your own thing?
I don't know, it's a difficult question. I mean, it's a...
Sorry.
This is why Lou's good at this. I don't know, I mean, I feel like there's people who I respect and who I really like as individuals, and people who I really like their work. But, you know, it's kind of, there's different reasons why people do things, and I feel like my reasons for doing what I do are different to a lot of other people. And maybe it's kind of silly of me, but, you know, we could have done a lot of things that would have afforded us a lot more stability and comfort and financial security to go forwards if we'd have made different decisions. But it's difficult to make those decisions when I'm the one making the decisions, because it's important for me to just be happy with what I'm doing and not, I don't know, I'm basically not, there's a lot of greed, I think, in what I do, and I don't necessarily think I'm a greedy person, and there's a lot of that at play, I think, and it's sort of like a lot of one-upmanship and a lot of, I don't know, it just feels sometimes it becomes about something else when I want it to be about something else, totally removed from anything to do with like, you know, pie charts and sales figures and invoices, and you know, it's a big part of it, but it shouldn't inform the work, I don't think.
Because one of the things that you've said to me recently, which I found very interesting, is you're not necessarily that preoccupied with kind of Gareth Pugh as a label continuing after you. You know, I think a lot of young designers, when they reach maybe the 10-year mark, similarly to you, they start to think of they remove themselves as an individual from their brand, and they start to separate themselves from...
Oh, I'd love to do that.
Yeah. But you're not that preoccupied with it. You know, I remember I interviewed Lou Dalton, and I was so impressed with her ambition, because she talks about it as something that she wanted to live on after her. But you don't seem to have that.
No, not
desire.
at all. It's kind of like, I don't have, first and foremost, I don't have that much of a long-term vision or goal. It's kind of, you know, it's a bit like Alcoholics Anonymous. You take every day as it comes. So it's kind of like...
I'm Gareth, the fashion designer.
But it's not that I've ever been to a meeting, by the way. But it's kind of like, you know, it doesn't occur to me the need or for the want for it to exist beyond me. I certainly don't have that level of vanity where I would want my name to live on. You know, like, I want to live forever, fame. It's kind of like, it's a good song, but, you know, you know, maybe to dance at a disco rather than actually being a reality, it's not a business plan of mine to have it continue, because, you know, it's like you do things while you're around and then you're gone, and it's like, that's just how it is. It's like, if things exist, it's because there's a business there. It's not because people want it to exist because it's inspiring, it's because it sells well. And, you know, we've always treaded that line where people are sometimes quite scared business, and it's kind of funny how, like, suits and fashion don't necessarily mix. I think the suits are kind of a little bit scared of what I do, so I'm fine with that. You know?
Tell me more about that. So just in terms of your business model, you're kind of happy as long as you can keep doing what you're doing, that's all that matters.
Well, yeah, that's my business model. We don't really have one, but it's like, that's it. It's like, you know, as long as we can continue to do it in a way that is, you know, it's like in a way that is, I don't know, it's like just in a way that we can do it. It's like, you know, I feel like I kind of half killed my team this season because it was like a difficult season in order to produce the show that we produced, but it was worth it, and they could all appreciate why we had to push that hard and pedal that much to get to the point in which we were able to show it, because that's what's worthwhile. It's like being able to do all this work and step back from it and go, this is what we did, this is what we all achieved together. Whereas, you know, it's like, that's just if we can do that season on season, which is, it's like, that's why the 10-year thing was such a, it kind of like came up and smacked me on the face, because it was like something you never really think about, and then you're like, shit, it's like, it's been 10 years, and it's like literally been this kind of quite like hand-to-mouth existence. I'm not sort of like, playing a little tiny small violin with a with a tale of sorrow, but it's not been the easiest path to tread, but it's been the path that we chose, and it's just a really proud moment to sort of feel that we kind of were able to do it, because I feel there's a lot of things that have changed since I started, and it's a lot more about selling clothes, and it's much more about like your turnover and this, that, and the other. And it's while that is important to facilitate ideas and creativity, I think that sometimes can really strip back the space for creativity. I have a very small team. People are surprised that I only have me, my boyfriend who can't sew, who answers a lot of emails, and my studio manager, and that's it. That's my team in London. We have like one pattern cutter who we work with like maybe it's a couple of weeks a season. We have like a lot of very willing, happy helpers, but it's like that's the reality of what I do. It's not like, someone feeding me peeled grapes on the chaise longue and me pointing a stick. It's like, it's like in the studio sort of like making things. It's like that's where my interest lies. It's not about, going and drinking champagne on the top of the Eiffel Tower. It's about making things in my studio in East London.
Yeah, it's a strange time though, isn't it? Because I speak to a lot of students, and I think there's a real ambition in London because of that culture we've created of kind of, you can do it, set up your own label, and because of the amazing initiatives like Fashion East and New Gen. But I think there's this real drive for young designers who are perhaps at college to start their own labels. But I think a lot of that drive, it is for things like, fame and monetary gain, and it must feel kind of, I think people would imagine that you live a very different life to what you live. And is that frustrating sometimes?
It is, but I understand, and I've understood it for a long time. It's like when you first start, I'm going to give you a little hand graph here. When you
said
start,
you hated graphs.
No, it's the best way to explain it. But when you start, the reality and the expectation of your reality are very, very close.
Yeah.
But as soon as you kind of like go or move to Paris, or you're celebrating 10 years, it's like the reality and expectation is like this huge gulf of crap in between that people expect your situation to be as such, and it is as such, and it's not frustrating. It's just that's the reason that we have so many people going through fashion college, because people expect it to be something different.
Yeah.
And it's not until you leave and understand the reality. When I left St. Martin's, the assumption is that you get handed whatever you want on a silver platter. It's not the case. Louise Wilson always said that people used to expect to walk through the doors of St. Martin's and be sprinkled with magic dust.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just going to St. Martin's or going to a fashion college doesn't afford you the possibilities that people have. It's you can do whatever you want to do with whatever you have. It's just how much you want it. It's like it literally, and that's why St. Martin's is so good, because it's such a bad college. They don't teach you anything. It's like you go to the library. I remember when I went for I was doing an application form for my new generation thing for the British Fashion Council, and the librarian wouldn't. There was an article of my stuff in the Face magazine, and she wouldn't let me take it from the library desk to the photocopier, which is literally from here to there. And it's like, she wasn't helping me. And it's like, so, I have to go outside for a cigarette and get a girl to kind of book it out with a card and photocopy it and be like, you did it anyway, whatever. But it's like, they teach you this, whether it's and I've always wondered this with St. Martin's, whether it's intentionally that difficult or if they just employ arseholes. But it's like, they make it so hard that when you leave, it's like, if you want something doing, you do it yourself, because it's the only way to get it done properly. So maybe St Martin's just produces these really sort of like hungry, like, you know, kind of very, very, what's the word? Like,
Makes you quite ferocious, doesn't it? And
but also sort of like reliant only on yourself rather than waiting for people to like hand you things. You know, if you want to do something, do it, rather than waiting for someone to tell you what to do or how to do it or whatever.
Which is interesting with your trajectory at St Martin's, because you didn't, you know, most of your peers on the Fashion Week calendar now, they did that kind of infamous MA with Louise Wilson, but you didn't actually do that MA because you couldn't afford to do the MA, and she was kind of quite supportive of that, wasn't she?
Well, Louise, you know, God bless us all, always has a different spin on this than I have. She always used to say, oh, I told you didn't have to do the MA, you didn't need to, and I was like, you know, she basically just said I couldn't do it because I couldn't afford it. You know, there's a different sort of, there's a different story there. I went for the interview twice, and twice I got on. And the second interview I went, she was like, can you afford it? I was like, no. And she was like, well, why are you here? Because, you know, at the end of the day, although she never agreed with it, they had to put on students who could afford to do that course. And coming off a BA, it was just something that I couldn't do. It was going to be like 22 grand's worth of debt, even though even before sort of even making a collection. So God knows what it is now. It must be a lot more, because we're talking about, you know, 10 years ago.
Yeah. It's terrifying.
But it was always a regret, because obviously Louise, you know, I first heard about St Martin's via a sort of Sunday Times style day in the life of Louise Wilson, and it sounded amazing, and she sounded amazing. And when I first met her, it was like, she was amazing. You know, it's like she's this incredibly, you know, I always say like fashion's Joe Brand. She's like really sort of foul-mouthed and dry and sarcastic, but she gets the job done, and she has this sort of respect that, you know, nobody else can sort of command, because she, you know, she's got the goods to back it up. So yeah, never quite managed to get through that process of, but also that maybe kind of informs the way I do it, because, you know, the BA at St Martin's is, well, when I did it, not sure if it is the same now, but it was very sort of make, do, amend kind of thing, whereas the MA was much more about, or you got the feeling it was much more about sort of really getting down to the nuts and bolts of who you are as a designer, and you know, like really choosing a path and running with it, rather than this kind of quite cherry-picking sort of aesthetic that you have. Glue guns and glitter. That was the MA, but obviously that was, that was the BA, but it was just, you know, circumstance that meant that I wasn't able to sort of do that, but yeah.
When you started out, I find it really interesting, and I know we've talked about this before, but when you did that first Fashionista collection, you know, so many people drew comparisons to your work, and I think because of the kind of the club influences, and I think, you know, because of Wow Wow and things like that, people drew influences from like Lee Bowery, and they said that it was very similar to him, and I think that's kind of continued through your career, where people have equated your work to his, but also equated your work to people like McQueen's. And I thought about it recently, and I kind of agreed that there is a similarity, but it's not in aesthetic, it's in sensibility. It's because it's about doing what you feel you have to do, because you can't do anything else. But have you found those continued comparisons quite frustrating, or did you draw sort of inspiration from Lee Bowery?
Well, no, and no, I don't find them frustrating or offensive, or, you know, it's kind of, I feel you know, the one thing that sort of links everything up is this idea of sort of fearlessness, about doing something on your own terms, and fuck them if they don't like it. It's what I do. Yeah. And I feel like that's a great sort of, very English, although Lee Bowery was Australian, sort of very sort of good way of looking at things, because I'm my own worst critic. Regardless of what anybody else might say about my work, it's like, you know, I'm the one who has to kind of have it define who I am, and to be sort of put on a level with that, it's kind of, you know, like McQueen was one of the reasons that I started to do what I do, kind of looking at like, you know, sort of OK magazine sort of fashion specials that I used to make my mum buy and summed, you know, and then, you know, I don't find it annoying, I just find it sort of a shame that there's like only a couple of people, you know, like McQueen and Lee Barry, that people can compare something that's interesting to.
But do you think they do it because they don't, we've talked about this, but do you think it's because they don't understand it? So it's easier to kind of put it in that old, crazy, theatrical club kids box because it kind of others it in a way that means they don't have to...
Yeah, there's an element of that, for sure. But yeah, I mean, like I say, it's kind of, it's unfortunate that maybe we live in a world where there's not so much more of that around that people can kind of compare it to. But it's fine, it's, you know, I'm not...
Do you think people understand your work?
I don't know, I mean, I tend to not like to think about things too much. And, you know, like, it's a difficult rap when you sort of, you're in a position where you have to let go of the baby, you have to sort of like let it out into a wider world, and people are totally entitled to make of it what they will, and I have to be fine with that. I have to be fine with that because that's the way it works.
Yeah.
I think the people who get it are the people who I have a lot of affinity with and who I understand, and they understand me, and they're the people whose opinions I care about, and the people who don't get it, you know, they don't get it, it's fine. Mm-hmm. You know, I always say that if I'm trying to please everybody, I'm doing something wrong, so I'm trying to please everybody.
And tell me, I'm conscious of time, but one of the things I do want to talk about is kind of how you want your work to be seen. And I know, you know, you've only done 10 years, and as you say, you know, you're not old, but do you think about legacy in any ways? Do you think about what you want the takeaway from your work to be?
Oh God, not really. I mean, the one example that I have of something that like really sort of made me think that my work had something more to do with, you know, like working in, you know, because when you do work and when you're working on something like a show or a collection, and you're working in such kind of like strange, closed, claustrophobic environment, and it's all sort of, you know, a lot of my studios have been sort of around like Stoke Newington, blah-de-blah, whatever, Dalston. I did a collection in this kind of awful squat with these Australian lesbians in Stoke Newington who hated my music, and it was such like a difficult time. Like they used to have all these parties and sort of like come up with like bottles of Sambuca and be like, I've really got a lot of work to do. It's like, I'm fine. I did this show, and maybe like 2 or 3 years later, we did this thing in New York with MAC Cosmetics, and this girl came up to me, and she kind of like got her arm out, and there's this huge tattoo of an outfit that I made it was actually for Nick Knight, asked me to make him an outfit, and we made it in that studio. She had the outfit tattooed on her arm, and she was basically saying that the first time she saw that show that we did, which was comprised of 12 outfits, that being one of them, it kind of changed her idea of what fashion was, and it made her believe that it could be something that she could be part of. And she wasn't from New York, she was like from some kind of like crazy town in the middle of America, and for that to translate to somebody in a other situation in a whole different place, it was, you know, it's like, you sometimes forget that again, going back to this like afforded position or platform that you have as a designer to sort of like show your work and speak to a lot of different people, I always remember that, and how surprised I was, and how kind of grateful I guess I felt of having the ability to speak to other people in a different way, you know, because I'm not the best person at sort of vocalizing or describing or, you know, like not very good at this whole speaking thing, but it's nice to be able to speak to people in a different way through, you know, like visual or through work or just being part of that dialogue. And it's important, just important to sort of like, you know, it's part of life. It's, if we didn't have art or we didn't have design or we didn't have something to challenge us, then what would we have? I don't know.
This is a difficult question, but it's my last one, so don't worry. Have you changed your idea of what fashion could be? Because, you know, talking about when you were reading kind of those fashion supplements and applying to St. Martin's and starting out 10 years in, is it different to what you thought you could do?
I feel like I've come full circle, which is really fun for me. Because, you know, you start off, and it's that whole like grass is always greener thing. It's like you always want what you don't have, and you think, oh, if I do this or if I blah de blah, it's like you can get there, and then you always sort of find yourself scrabbling for the thing that you're never going to get. And I feel like I've come all the way around to understanding that what I have and what I do is the best thing that I could possibly wish for, because it's totally comes from me, and it totally has this gravity of sort of, you know, this level of conversation with a whole wider audience than I could even possibly fathom. And it's like, that's what's important, and it's not about anything other than me being able to do what I do and be happy doing that and make other people happy doing it. I mean, you know, the whole dance thing, it's like, maybe I'm just sort of a highbrow entertainer. It sure beats sort of like being a dancer on a cruise ship, you know, which was career choice number 2. But that's kind of ultimately what is the end goal. It's kind of, it's not to be a legend or sort of like for my thing to like live on longer than I am. It's kind of just to be in the moment and to produce things that people, other people, as well as myself, find challenging or beautiful or ugly or they hate it or they love it. It's like, I don't care. It's like, at least it's part of some sort of wider dialogue or appreciation of other things that, you know, it's like a proposition. It's not, I'm not saying this is what it is, it's just like, this is how it could be. And yeah, it's just what I do.
Well, you do it very well. Thanks, Gareth.